Apologize. I'm going to have to apologize to you as well because I'm going to have to rush to another meeting at the university later on for this morning. But let me suffice to say that the topic of this morning, in fact, we could say the topic of the entire week here, has been really centered around climate change. And for small states, many of us, we do come from small island states, this is, of course, of paramount importance. We've attended many sessions so far, and I can tell you and I can share with you that in every single session that we've attended, be it on gender, be it on youth, be it on development, or even on AI, the subject matter of climate change, is the recurrent theme. So it is very important for us to talk about this and, of course, to see how we can move forward as one big Commonwealth. On this note, let me thank you very much, and my apologies. I'm going to have to leave a little bit early, but our Secretary General will be joining you shortly this morning.
So thank you very much. Thank you, DSG, for highlighting the seriousness of the discussion and the importance of the serious conversations that we would have here. While it is serious, but it's also the importance of how these issues are relevant for all of us in every aspect of life, so to speak. Now, we are still recovering from the effects of COVID-19. But the reality of the matter is due to climate change, there are more deaths every year due to climate change than the entirety of the deaths that we had due to COVID. So this is why it is so important, and everybody recognizes the importance and seriousness of it. And so we are really honored to have this esteemed panel join us here today. So I would like to first invite Honorable Prime Minister Sovaleni from Tonga to give his remarks, please.
Prime Ministers, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, Secretary General of the Pacific Forum, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Malo Lele, and a warm Pacific greetings. We are deeply grateful to the government and the people of Samoa for their warm welcome and generous hospitality. As COP29 nears, Tonga underscores the urgent need to bolster global climate finance commitments, particularly through the new collective quantified goals, or NCQGs, to achieve the 1.5 degree Celsius target. Tonga is committed to driving innovative climate finance solutions that address the escalating climate crisis and secure a sustainable future. As the Pacific Global Climate Finance Champion, I am steadily committed to advancing innovative financial solutions that address the urgent challenges of climate change, ensuring a sustainable future not just for the Pacific but for our planet. At a regional level, Pacific leaders approved the establishment of the first Pacific-led, member-owned and managed regional community financing facility, and Tonga is actively supporting the advocacy campaign for funding for the Pacific Resilience Fund, or PRF, to bolster the region's capacity to withstand climate impacts and protect vulnerable communities. As a small island developing state, Tonga faces unique climate vulnerabilities, including rising sea levels, extreme weather, and biodiversity loss. These challenges shape our perspective on the NCQGs. The NCQGs offer a critical opportunity to secure increased climate finance and address Tonga's pressing climate needs. We urge for sufficient funding to implement tailored adaptation and mitigation measures outlined in our NDCs. Tonga advocates for equitable access to climate finance ensuring all seats can benefit from available financial mechanisms. We call for the NCQG, the process to prioritize removing barriers, such as complex application procedures and stringent eligibility criteria. Tonga prioritizes resilience building through climate finance to enhance community resilience, particularly in relation to our NEPs and NTCs. Supporting initiatives like disaster preparedness, sustainable agriculture, and climate-resilient infrastructure is crucial. We emphasize the integration of local knowledge and community participation in climate finance projects. The NCQG process should prioritize funding that support community-led initiatives, ensuring local voices are valued and projects align with specific needs and priorities. Tonga underscores the importance of donor countries and institutions making long-term commitments. The NCQG need to offer predictable and stable funding streams to enable effective planning and implementation of climate actions over time. We also advocate for capacity building programs to empower local governments and communities to successfully execute climate projects and meet our NTC targets. The NCQG should incorporate measures to provide technical support and training, strengthening the capacity of SIDS in managing climate finance. Tonga has benefited from the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which aims to strengthen countries' capacity to access and utilize climate finance resources. Tonga, being among the pioneering Pacific nations to benefit from this initiative, has the potential for substantial gains. In conclusion, Tonga reaffirms its stance on the NCQGs, emphasizing the urgent need for accessible, equitable, and continuous climate finance to address our unique vulnerabilities. We strive for the NCQG to effectively support our efforts to combat climate change and promote sustainable development in the region through a focus on resilience, community engagement, long-term commitments, and aligning with development goals. By actively involving stakeholders, enhancing communication efforts, emphasizing the economic benefits, and mobilizing commitments, we can create momentum for the newly collectively quantified goals on climate financing prior to COP29. Through collaborative and strategic advocacy, we can foster a groundswell of support that drives greater ambition and leads to tangible actions in addressing climate change. Malo apito, and I thank you.
Maloa, Prime Minister Sovaleni, thank you for setting the scene about the new collective quantified goals. So as you know, this session is about building consensus for climate finance targets in the Commonwealth. And it's an opportune moment for us as we are gathered here as the countries of the Commonwealth to discuss what our ambition is or should be for the new collective quantified goals and nationally determined contributions 3.0, and also setting the scene toward the ambitions we want to take to COP29 itself. So this session will be focusing on these, and we will have all our speakers talking on this subject. With this, I now invite Honorable Feleti Teo, Prime Minister of Tuvalu, for his comments.
Thank you, Madam MC, Prime Minister Sovaleni, DSG, Excellencies, with all protocols being observed, I'm delighted to be here this morning. And let me firstly extend to you all a Tuvalu Talofa, not the Samoan version of it, but the Tuvalu Talofa. And a very good morning to all of you. Thank you, Commonwealth Secretariat, for the invite to share some perspectives on these important matters of the new collective quantified goals, NCQG. and the nationally determined contributions, NDCs. Both are closely and integrally linked, and developing countries cannot be expected to take on a new mitigation target without the necessary and requisite financial support. So climate finance is critically important to support efforts on adaptation and the much needed fund for loss and damage. Let me, Madam MC, offer 7 points with respect to our expectations for a decision on the NCQG at COP29 in Bagu next month. The first point I wish to make is that the new finance goal should be fit for purpose. It must also be implementable, responsive to developing countries' needs, and supports implementation of nationally determined contributions, also national adaptation plans and loss and damages plans. The finance should also be commensurate with the need to reduce emissions to keep us on target to meeting the 1.5 degree Celsius goal of the Paris Agreement. And it should also be commensurate with the impact of climate change that we already have to confront. Secondly, Madam MC, the NCQG should establish a regular cycle of pledging so that it is timed to coincide with each global stocktake. It is important that the finance is aligned with the regular reviews of the Paris Agreement, which are undertaken by the global stocktake. Thirdly, priority funding should be provided to the most vulnerable countries, particularly small island developing states and least developed countries. So far, climate change funding has primarily focused on mitigation outcomes with less emphasis on adaptations. While mitigation finance is important, we must ensure that a proper share goes to adaptations and a new and substantial share goes to loss and damage. Fourthly, we need to think outside the box, so to speak, for sources of funding, particularly for loss and damage. Already the cost of climate change impact in developing countries is in the trillions of dollars. We will never meet the required finance for loss and damage through your traditional donor support. We need to explore new sources of finance, including levies on fossil fuel use, including aviation and shipping. We need to establish a clear program for debt forgiveness for the most vulnerable countries. Drawdowns from the IMF is another possibility. There are many interesting ideas floating around, and I think we should explore all those ideas. In fact, it would be good to hold a meeting of finance experts to make recommendations for new sources of finance for loss and damage. And perhaps the Commonwealth Secretariat, I may respectfully suggest, could host such a meeting. The fifth point I wish to make, in the context of donor funding, we need to find a means to ensure burden sharing among all donors. Clearly, some major economies are not contributing their fair share of climate finance. We need much more transparency in climate change finance so that we know who is paying the most and who is paying the least. I think transparency is quite critical in climate financing. Madam MC, the sixth point that I wish to make is that climate change finance for adaptation and loss and damage should be grant or contributor based only. Loans are simply not acceptable. Countries should not go into debt to pay for the impact of climate change. The polluter pays principle must be the key principle of climate change and addressing its impact. For mitigation finance, concessional loans on highly favorable terms may be appropriate so long as the loans deliver a prompt return on investment so that loans can be paid off quickly. The last point, Madam MC, that I wish to make is that the rules around the market mechanisms established under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement must be concluded at COP29. And I think that is imperative. We need both mechanisms under Article 6.2 and Article 6.4 to deliver a share of proceeds for the adaptation fund. We cannot allow some countries to stall the negotiations and hinder our effort to support the adaptation fund. DSG, we know that the upcoming COP in Bagu will be a finance COP. We, that is the Commonwealth nations, must therefore work together to ensure that this COP is a success and that it delivers adequate and accessible finance for developing countries. We can only do this if we have a common purpose and work in harmony with each other. And I look forward to hearing from others this morning on how we can advance this common purpose of delivering the climate change finance that is needed and readily accessible. Thank you.
That we should be thinking about. I note the point about the meeting of finance experts. We have set up a high-level working group for the new financial architecture as Commonwealth, and we do this convening alongside the IMF World Bank meetings normally. And I think this provides a very good outline for us to think about how do we host a meeting to look particularly with finance ministers on these aspects as well. We couldn't go to IMF because we are here this year, but we do have, you've given us a menu of things which very clearly outline what we should be focusing on. I also like your point about out-of-the-box solutions, and that is exactly what the world needs, because there are complexities and challenges, but we have to think together out of the box to find the solutions that we face as a world today. Thank you once again, and I now call on Vice President of the Republic of Maldives, His Excellency Hussein Mohammad Latif. Over to you, sir.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our world is witnessing the escalating impacts of the climate crisis. Global warming, devastating wildfires, rising sea levels, and extreme weather events continue to affect us, especially the most vulnerable. This year is on track to be the hottest year on record, and many of us have here already experienced extreme weather events at a scale we have never witnessed before at our homes. Fierce hurricanes are making devastating paths in the Atlantic as we speak. For the Commonwealth, a diverse family of nations, the stakes are particularly high. Many of us are disproportionately vulnerable to climate change. This calls for a unified response to safeguard our future. As we approach COP29 in Azerbaijan, let us unite within the Commonwealth as many countries struggle to meet the commitments under the Paris Agreement. It is essential to mobilize predictable, adequate, and sustainable climate finance to support ambitious climate action. Our resolve Our resounding call for this COP is clear: to agree and conclude on a new collective quantified goal on climate finance. We need a collective quantified goal on climate finance that exceeds the previously agreed $100 billion per year, a goal which includes essential sub-goals for loss and damage response, mitigation, and adaptation, and a goal which considers the needs of developing countries, including the special circumstances of SIDS. These goals should go hand in hand with the required changes in the international financial architecture, which does not adequately cater to our development needs. Let us approach COP29 with ambition, but also with willingness to work together and bridge the gap. We cannot afford to leave COP29 without an agreed finance goal. We know the finance is the lifeblood of effective climate action. Yet, many in the Commonwealth family still face significant barriers in accessing the necessary funds to combat climate change. We must recognize and dismantle these barriers. This is an area in which the Commonwealth has provided support to the Maldives. We have benefited greatly from the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub through the deployment of Climate Finance Advisor. This initiative has strengthened our capacity to attract climate finance and play a pivotal role in structuring our climate change fund. We look forward to this continued existence. As we look beyond COP29, let us bring ambition to the submission of our new nationally determined contribution, or our third NDC, next year. We ask members of the Commonwealth family to formulate their NDCs guided for the first global step take. This is our only chance to steer us back towards a 1.5-degree pathway. Our own submission will focus on increasing our current ambition. Friends and colleagues, let us act decisively and collaboratively for the future generations, for people and the planet. Let us in the Commonwealth lead this charge. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. My attempt at language ends with the Pacific, so I would say thank you to you for also acknowledging the support from the Climate Finance Access Hub. I now request Minister of Fisheries and Forests, Honorable Alitia Bainivalu, for her comments.
Prime Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Hayanda Vinaka, and a very good morning to you all. Billed as the Finance COP, negotiators will be tasked with agreeing on a new collective goal for the amount of climate finance that needs to be mobilized to support developing countries on an annual basis. This is a critical opportunity to ensure that our special needs and circumstances and resulting vulnerability to climate change impacts are recognized within the new climate financing regime. It is also a crucial opportunity to ensure that moving forward, we can secure the resources we need to deliver transformative adaptation outcomes and scale up our national response to the climate-driven loss and damage we are experiencing now and will continue to experience in the future. At COP30 in Brazil, parties must have submitted revised nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. These revised NDCs are due in early 2025. Based on the science, this next 5-year cycle of NDCs is critical for maintaining the ability to limit global average temperature to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Pacific Island countries have set out a firm vision for the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. The quantum must be evidence-based, consider both current and projected needs, and recognize the scale and urgency of the efforts required to both limit and address the impacts impacts of climate change. We are clear that the NCQG will be unbalanced if this does not account for the financing required for mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage financing needs within the scope of quantum setting method and approach. A further crucial dimension for small island states is the battle to ensure our special circumstances are not only recognized, but addressed and provided for within the global goal. Securing a minimum allocation floor for seeds and LDCs is not a proportional ask. It is a prerequisite that underpins the ability to deliver finance urgently to the most vulnerable. Many countries are focused on determining the total quantum of finance which will be agreed. The quantum is important. This is just about the size of the pie. But what is actually, if not more important, is to understand the size of the slice we can access. Ensuring there is clarity on how access will be improved, how our circumstances will be accounted for and responded to. If the size of the slice does not increase, it doesn't matter if the pie is 10 times bigger. Parties committed to transitioning away from fossil fuels. We must ensure this language is the key underlying frame and intent that underpins the negotiations in Baku, and that is reflected in the revised NDCs that need to be submitted in just 5 months' time. The new 2025 NDCs must be Paris-aligned. This is without question the make or break NDC cycle when it comes to the critical 1.5-degree temperature limit. We will not rest until this guardrail is secured. We owe this to those who will follow us, our children and grandchildren who will not forgive us if we lose our grip on the only means to make the process of adaptation achievable. If we exceed the 1.5-degree limit, the feasibility of adaptation declines with every increment above this limit. The loss and damage we will experience in the Pacific will be untenable. Even at 1.5 degrees and with temperature rise limited to this level, we face long-term and major adaptation needs and ongoing loss and damage, irrespective of scenario. The 2025 NDC are quite simply the last opportunity to align our intention, commitments, actions, and future with the fundamental premise of the Paris Agreement. Under Fiji's NDC, the Ministry of Forestry is responsible for 2 targets. Target 10, which is to conserve natural environment and biodiversity wealth, enabling sustainable long-term provision of ecosystem services, including carbon sequestration potential. Target 11 is to plant 30 million trees in 15 years, which is a priority for the ministry. Beginning in 2012, the Ministry of Forestry embarked on a number of tree planting initiatives, which included the million trees, reforestation of degraded forest, and the 4 million trees in 4 years, which has expanded to 30 million trees in 15 years. An initiative in response to commitments made at the UN Heads of States Climate Change Summit in New York in September of 2019. Under this 30 million trees in 15 years tree planting initiative, the total number of trees planted so far is about 19 million trees. These are types of trees including native, exotic, mangrove, and fruit trees. This national tree planting campaign has been supported and funded by the government of Fiji. Through other climate finance support, Fiji will be able to meet these NDC targets before the 15 years ends in 2035. And thank you very much.
So welcome to the Secretary General, Right Honourable Patricia Scotland. She's trying to juggle with sports and climate at the same time. So I think we can now request the Secretary General to give her remarks.
Talofa, everyone. I don't think anyone's here this morning. Talofa, everyone. Oh, I see. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here this morning. As you know, I have just come from our sports breakfast, so they were making it clear that we all had to exercise. You avoided it. The climate breakfast is really a vital event at absolutely every CHOGM. An opportunity for us to come together in common cause and common action at this pivotal moment for our planet and for our people. We are blessed to be joined by so many leaders, members of state, accredited organisation and partners and wonderful colleagues. I hope you've all just taken a photograph of this magnificent panel. Not only are they beautiful and colourful, but they really represent our family, our Aina. Because the knowledge, your energy and your commitment really sustains us and drives us forward. In the face of the most complex and consequential challenge to humanity, a greater challenge than we have ever faced, each of you continue to make a profound difference. And together we will rise to the challenge which will shape the future of our world. The breakdown of the stable climate, which has enabled every breathtaking achievement in human history, unleashing extremes of heat, drought, storms, floods, and fires, the like of which we have never seen, is our responsibility. We are locked in a war with the planet we all share, with devastating consequences for our people, our prosperity, our peace, and collective prospects. As a direct result, the world's most vulnerable nations face being consumed by rising seas or drowned by debt. We see the impacts all across our Commonwealth family, Aina. In 2017, Hurricane Maria devastated my own country of birth, the Commonwealth of Dominica, costing 226% of her GDP. Last year, in Vanuatu, they were devastated by Category 5 cyclone Lola, which hit 7 months after twin cyclones Judy and Kevin had wiped out 50% of her GDP. In the Bahamas, they lived through Dorian, the biggest hurricane in human history, and we saw the devastation that caused. Literally, people drowning in their attics. And in Tonga, my dear brother who sits next to me suffered the impact of a tsunami caused by the eruption of an underwater volcano which was hundreds times more powerful than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In June of this year, I was in the Caribbean for the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting when Hurricane Beryl swept through 5 of our member states. And it was the biggest hurricane we had ever seen in June, the earliest hurricane. Normally we have a Category 1 at that time, but we knew that really precedented an incredible shift. And we've now seen what Hurricane Milton is doing, and regrettably the season is not done. So the impacts extend beyond our small island states. 1/3 of Pakistan was left underwater, with devastating displacement of life, a loss of life after unprecedented flooding. And Bangladesh remains tragically at risk as a result of sea level rise. Malawi has faced crises after crises because of cyclones and floods, and these are just a handful of examples, and everyone in this room can probably think of 5, 6, 7 more. And this is our new reality. These shocks cause tremendous economic and human suffering, exacerbating pre-existing vulnerabilities and undermining resilience. And the immense physical damage is compounded by the systems and structures which have created such imbalance in our world. Debt is one example. Across our most vulnerable states, the debt to GDP ratio is higher than the global average. And this is exacerbated by global financial rules, which restrict their access to concessional development financing. And with no alternative, many of our members are forced to obtain financing on unfavourable terms because that's the only terms available to them. And that results in an accumulation of high debt burden. And this really does create a vicious cycle where debt becomes unsustainable and access to finance becomes even more limited. I sometimes wish that when the cyclones and the hurricanes came, they didn't just take everything we built. They took the debt with it and dumped it into the sea. So when I took office in 2016, I made climate and climate change one of my top priorities, promising a Commonwealth response rooted in leadership, in effective diplomacy, and in decisive action. And in all aspects, our work today is world-leading. Our programme of practical action is more comprehensive and more impactful than ever before. We started with the development of a holistic approach to regenerative development to reverse climate change. And many of you will remember when we said we wanted to reverse climate change, we were told we were crazy. But what is the world doing now? Striving to reverse climate change. So 8 years later, the world has caught up with our Commonwealth. Our Climate Finance Access Hub has unlocked more than $360 million for our most vulnerable members. And I heard this morning that we have yet another $2.6 million coming. And I'm going to ask Uni Krishnan to give us the up-to-date amount, Uni, today. 365.2, and that has come from an investment which was 8.2 million and has now gone up to 9.2 million. Think about what we can do if we had a climate finance advisor in every country which needed it. The sort of return on our money is amazing, and we have $500 million worth of projects in the pipeline. And so far, and I'm touching the best wood I know, no application that we have made and which has been reviewed has been refused. So we've got this. Our reformed Meridian programme now manages a combined portfolio of more than $4.5 trillion of public debt across 50 countries. Meridian is the holy grail because we now can manage both private debt and public debt in a way that makes better sense. Our Blue and Living Lands Charter brings all our members together to address shared challenges and designed shared solutions for land and oceans. Our sustainable energy transition agenda is helping to accelerate the just transformation of energy generation and distribution across our Commonwealth. And through our Common Sensing project, we are using satellite technology and analysis of geospatial data to help our most vulnerable members make informed decisions about climate risks and building resilience. And through what I hope will be our Commonwealth Genius programme, we will build a cadre of geospatial and other experts across our Commonwealth to pool our knowledge, to analyse the data so that we can better prevent and better protect our countries from what is to come. And we have the partnership that we have developed, which has brought about New Compass as a tool to de-risk climate investments in small island states, enabling them to access more money much faster. And I hope the last thing we'll do is to launch our common space initiative. And we hope that the pooled power of all our space agencies and our meteorological agencies will help us to better understand the challenges that are coming down the road, but much more effectively create the solutions that we need to be the difference we need to make. And at this CHOGM, we're launching the Commonwealth Disaster Resilience Centre, which our leaders will, we hope, ratify the new world-leading Commonwealth Ocean Declaration. This meaningful, practical, impactful, technical support gives us the platform to build on a history of Commonwealth climate leadership which has been consistent and decisive. And do not forget, it was our leaders back in 1989, 3 years before the UNFCCC was created and the first Earth Summit in Rio, who called it out, who said that climate was posing an existential threat. And then the Commonwealth Consensus in 2015 catalysed global consensus for the Paris Agreement. And our members were at the forefront of the loss and damage breakthrough at COP27 and at COP28. And we in Kigali were the first set of leaders who demanded that loss and damage fund. But when the world comes together to make promises, and those promises are not delivered, faith in the integrity and credibility of multilateralism is undermined. And at the very moment when our most exposed nations need the world to work together more effectively than they ever have, our most vulnerable nations are running out of time. We are all running out of time. There can be no more equivocation, no more words without action, and this year must be the year of delivery. Delivery of greater levels of ambition and action, and delivery on the climate finance promises which have been outstanding for 15 years. COP29 must be the finance COP. I and my colleagues have been working closely with the COP29 presidency, and I'm confident in their commitment to ensuring these promises are delivered and is genuine. And through our partnership, they have made a political and financial commitment to all our small states. And I was so proud to be in Tonga with the Prime Minister and his government as we forged that consensus. And I'm confident that we will do everything we can to make sure they do everything they can to help us. Because none of us can do this on our own. Neither can the Commonwealth as a family. It will take all of us working together, re-energising our faith in our ability to work together and to drive progress together. This breakfast, this CHOGM, indeed every time we come together, is another opportunity for us to show our unity. And together in this room and at this CHOGM, we can send a really clear message that we are here, working together, striving together, and pushing for more ambition and action together. And we demand that the countries beyond the Commonwealth put their differences aside to work and to strive and to act with us. Our history shows that when we work as one, we are capable of the most extraordinary things. And there is still just enough time. But there is no time for us to waste. Soon my time as your Secretary General will come to an end. And I have given everything I can to this cause. And I'm proud of what we have together achieved. But be in no doubt, as long as I remain your Secretary General, indeed, for the rest of my life, I will continue to give everything I can to this campaign. Because we are in the fight of our lives. And it really does fall to us here and now to make the difference. We are the first generation to really suffer the impact of climatic change. But we are the last generation to be able to do something about it. Not only deliver humanity from the worst effects of climate change, but to catalyse a brighter, more sustainable future for everyone, everywhere. We cannot rely on anyone else. We cannot wait for anyone else. We can, we must, and we will be the change that we need to make, because our children will demand this of us. And when they come to say, who was sitting in the chair when these decisions were made, I hope each of us will be proud to say, I was. And we fought together, and we won. I couldn't ask for a better leadership team than we have in our 56 leaders. And I want, on behalf of all of us, to thank every leader in our Commonwealth for being willing to put their shoulder to the wheel and to fight this fight. And I thank you.
Thank you, SG. You have more energy than all of us put together at the Commonwealth Secretariat. But also, the sports breakfast has even doubled that energy level. So thank you for bringing that energy. But also, SG, we haven't taken the photograph because we were waiting for you to come, so we will take the photograph later. But I also want to thank you for making climate change a top priority in your since in your position as Secretary General and as you promised for the rest of your life. And also this clear call, demand for action for countries working together. I think we all hear that and we take that to COP29. At this moment, I also want to thank the Minister Alitalia Bainivalu because we missed thanking her in the middle of the thunder that SG brought in. So thank you, Minister, for your comments and your interventions, and particularly recognizing and calling for recognition of the special situation of small islands and finances necessary for the most vulnerable. So now it's the turn of His Excellency Joyker Nayak, Secretary for Foreign Affairs from the Government of Mauritius.
Prime Ministers, Secretary General, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. At the outset, let me thank the Government of Samoa for the very warm hospitality and excellent arrangements made to bring us together to share our thoughts on the critical issue of climate change. We all agree climate change emergency is the most pressing global issue that is affecting all countries, and we must stop ecocide. There is, however, climate change is disproportionately affecting SIDS like Mauritius, which have contributed the least to global emissions. There is an urgent imperative for us to have access to predictable, sustainable, concessional climate finance to mitigate and combat these complex challenges. GNI per capita masks our inherent vulnerabilities and should not be considered as a metric by IFIs and the international community. The progress made till date on the multidimensional vulnerability index to support concessional financing is welcome, and we look forward to a universal vulnerability index. We should ensure a common but differentiated responsibility when we tackle climate change. Even with our constraints, Mauritius plans to increase its renewable energy to 60% by 2030 and phase out coal-generated electricity at the same time. We have set the ambitious target to achieve a carbon-neutral economy by 2070. This will include decarbonization of manufacturing and our transport sector. Despite our inherent vulnerabilities as a SIDS, we continue to commit national resources and efforts to fund 35% of our NDC out of a total financial requirements of around 6.5 billion. We have adopted the Climate Change Act, which provides the legal framework to enhance climate change resilience and reduce emissions. However, we will not be able to achieve our targets unless we have access to predictable and timely climate finance. Whilst we welcome the initial capitalization of the Lost and Damaged Fund, the current funding gaps are huge. In this context, like all SIDS, we are looking forward and hoping that the NCQG goal on climate finance is agreed by all at COP29 in Baku next month. Adopting a strong NCQG at COP29 will set the foundation to rebuild and strengthen trust in the international climate system. The composition of the finance, the share of the grant, concessional and debt finance will be more than ever important. Financing capital-intensive climate-related initiatives necessary to lower emissions will cost trillions of dollars. There is no other way if we want our planet to survive. Excellencies, Mauritius is proud to host the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. Since the inception of the hub in October 2016, we have played our part as host. We remain committed to fully supporting the hub in delivering on its primary aim to facilitate improved access by small and vulnerable countries to climate finance. The Climate Finance Access Hub is rightly considered as one of the success stories and flagship examples of the Commonwealth's engagement in the global effort to contribute to climate change, resilience, and development. The hub has helped countries access more than $360 million, approve 88 projects, and train 290 individuals. We are pleased that 15 countries have been provided with technical support in Africa, Asia, Indo-Pacific, and the Caribbean regions through the deployment of Commonwealth National Climate Finance Advisors and with the additional regional climate finance advisors who have been deployed to help governments. This has been an effective tool in support of the small states of the Commonwealth. I have no doubt that this will continue to help the vulnerable countries in their fight against climate change. We thank the support of our international partners, along with the Secretariat, for continuing to support this flagship initiative. The hub needs more resources to be able to deliver on its increasing mandate. Similarly, there needs to be more synergy with other climate-related funds and various funds by IFIs to address the challenges of climate change. As the host country, Mauritius will continue to fully support the work of the hub in the execution of its important mandate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Naik. Also to Mauritius thanks to Mauritius for hosting the Climate Finance Access Hub. And we truly appreciate your call for the need for more resources for CIFA as we are working toward the sustainability of the CIFA as we celebrate the 10 years, but look forward to another 10 years of the success and the work that we can do to support our member countries. So thank you once again. So we're going to do something different from what is in the agenda slightly, because as guardians of our countries, I would request all the panelists here to stay over here, while the other speakers, we're going to call them to the podium to speak. So we start with, as you know, this work, particularly of CIFA, is a combination and it's a partnership with our member countries, our contributing countries. We started with Mauritius being the host for CIFA. So I'd like to call Emmy Faruya, Director General for International Organizations and Human Rights, Government of Canada, for her intervention.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Talofa. Good morning, everyone. Is this working? Okay, it has to be very close. I've learned. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Canada would like to extend a sincere and warm thank you to Samoa for your exceptional hosting of CHOGM. Meeting in the Pacific has a very special meaning for Canada, too. Many people forget Canada is actually also a Pacific nation. We are an Arctic nation, and we are a nation of the Americas. We're also very deeply conscious of the existential threat, and we've heard so much of that this morning, of climate change to so many of our states and to our communities. Both in Canada, a country with the longest coastline in the world, much of which is inhabited by our Indigenous peoples, and of course of the existential threat and impact climate change imposes on small island states and Pacific Island countries. We have listened to partners, and we understand the imperative and the urgency to act as a Commonwealth family. Canada is proud to confirm we are contributing $4.65 million to the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. Thank you. Thank you. This funding enables the development and the deployment of national climate finance advisors to small island countries and small states, helping them build capacity to access climate financing for adaptation and mitigation initiatives. A regional climate finance advisor will also support a coordinated regional approach to climate financing. Our funding also bolsters the Climate Finance Access Hub Central Hub in Mauritius that we just heard about, with gender equality and health expertise to support the nexus work of climate advisors and ultimately to help improve the quality of climate initiatives. Canada's well-known focus on gender equality is a core component of our international assistance programming around the world. We are pleased to contribute to the Climate Finance Access Hub efforts in ensuring that all women and girls, as well as men and boys, are supported from all segments of society and that they are positively impacted by this climate finance funding. Thank you very much. Fa'afetai. Thank you.
Canada for this collaboration and partnership to make this help and support happen for our most vulnerable countries, as well as thematic areas such as gender and health that you mentioned. And these advisors will be located in the hub in Mauritius. So thank you to Canada for that. I now would request Ms. Kate Wallace, Assistant Secretary, Commonwealth Senior Officials, Government of Australia.
Secretary-General and our eminent panellists. Talofa, and thank you to Samoa and to every Samoan who has given each of us such a warm welcome since we arrived here. I did want to share that Australia is proud to be a founding supporter of the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, and we are pleased to see how it has grown over the past 8 years and its efforts to work at the coalface to unlock financing for priority climate projects on the ground. As a small teaser, my Foreign Minister will be arriving in Samoa soon, and I would say watch this space. I'm sure she will have more to say in relation to Australia's financing. We have heard from some of our panellists today about the importance of training and how it can unlock the power, particularly of our young people. Australia was happy to host the inaugural Commonwealth Youth Climate Negotiations training at Australia House in London earlier in September. We had 29 participants from 23 Commonwealth nations taking part in that training to prepare them for COP29. Countries represented included Fiji, Bangladesh, Maldives, Jamaica, Dominica, Kenya and Lesotho, and many more. We were very pleased that ComSec was able to secure the eminent Dr. James Fletcher as the lead trainer. He is the former Minister for Sustainable Development, Energy and Environment for St. Lucia. And of course, he was very eminent and played an integral role in the Paris Agreement negotiations at COP21. So over 3 days, the training sought to equip participants with the necessary knowledge and skills in climate policy, diplomacy and negotiation to effectively represent their countries and advocate for ambitious climate action at international forums and negotiations. In addition to training, Australia hosted a climate networking reception for the participants and key climate contacts. And of course, Samoan High Commissioner, Her Excellency Francella Strickland, attended as a very honourable guest, and I think she's becoming a bit of a rock star in these parts. Almost 2/3 of the trainees will attend COP29 as part of their country delegation, and some of them for the first time. So we did really want to express our appreciation to ComSec because this is really an important part of the practical efforts that are being delivered to make sure that we have got a group of young people that are coming through and really able to participate and engage in these important multilateral settings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Wallace. And we'd like to thank in advance for whatever the announcements the Foreign Secretary is going to make. But also you highlighted the importance of training. And we have been, that's been supporting training even in the region of officials working on climate issues. We had a training in March in Fiji for officials of across the Pacific region. And I think what you referred to is the training we did in London for young people on climate negotiations, which the Australia House hosted very kindly. So thank you for highlighting the training. But I believe the Prime Minister of Tuvalu has to leave. I'm going to stop him kindly, but because we would like to play this video, which we have received from the President of COP from Azerbaijan, because what we're talking here is also taking these ideas and taking these next steps to Azerbaijan, to COP29. So just 5 minutes, Prime Minister, and then we'll...
especially to my friend, the Secretary General, the Right Honourable Ms. Patricia Scotland, for her valued partnership in climate action. This year, the COP29 presidency has worked together with you to put small island developing states at the heart of climate conversation. COP29 presidency traveled to Antigua and Barbuda to attend the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States. They will also join the Pacific Island Leaders Summit. On both trips, we saw firsthand the devastating impact climate change is having on these communities. Small islands are now enduring losses that can't be recovered. These are the communities most exposed to climate change. And as it is everywhere in the world, youth in these communities are one of the most vulnerable. As those who face the greatest impacts, your voices must be central to this year's UN Climate Change Conference. That's why the government of Azerbaijan is taking concrete measures to facilitate the meaningful participation of cities. This program reflects our commitment to putting the voices of those most affected by climate change at the center of the agenda. Only together we can drive the urgent action needed to address the climate crisis. We look forward to welcoming you to Baku in just a few weeks. Today's event is an opportunity for us to reflect on the potential of technology to help in our efforts against climate change. Technology can help us to increase energy efficiency and provide monitoring and early warning for climate-related disasters. The COP29 presidency is working to support these efforts in ways that will also bridge the digital divide and promote sustainable development. At COP29, we will host the first digitalization day to shine a spotlight on the opportunities and challenges posed by digitalization. We will also launch the COP29 Green Digital Action. This declaration will support us to work towards using for climate action, reducing the environmental footprint of digitalization and advancing digital inclusion. The declaration also includes a focus on making sure that digital solutions are accessible to all, including cities. We are honored to work with the Secretariat on bringing technology to the climate change fight. While in Tonga, COP29 presidency joined the Commonwealth Secretary General to formalize a joint declaration aimed at enhancing climate action in cities and other vulnerable member countries. As part of this initiative, we signed a memorandum of understanding between the Azerbaijan Space Agency, Azercosmos, and the Commonwealth Secretariat. This initiative focuses on the use of geospatial information to support climate action across Commonwealth member countries. By using the power of space technology and geospatial data, this partnership will enhance climate resilience, improve disaster preparedness, and support sustainable development. Dear colleagues, dear friends, thank you again for the opportunity to address this meeting. The urgency and scale of our challenge is clear. We look forward to working together to meet this challenge. I thank you.
Thanks to Azerbaijan, and SG has been working persistently till they cannot say no, and that Azerbaijan is supporting our small island states' participation at COP29. I think the Prime Minister has to leave now, so before he goes, I request just 2 minutes to take a photograph with this beautiful panel, as SG mentioned. But UK, so apologies, we'll do it immediately after. So. Okay, so, yes, okay. So I believe okay. So we have, it was an essential but an important interruption. So if I may call you back together, we have three more speeches, and then we'll have to leave the room in 10 minutes. So may I request all of you to be as before, as they say in sports language. Our next speaker will be Ms. Freya Jackson. She's the Director, Multilateral and Human Rights Department, Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, Government of United Kingdom. Ms. Freya Jackson, can I request you to come to the... No, afterwards. Sorry. I think please come.
Good morning, Talof. I'm conscious it's always slightly complicated when we switch people in and out of things. Can you hear me now? Okay, very close to the mouth. Good morning. Thank you so much for convening this extremely important event and for inviting us to join. As the Secretary General and our esteemed panel have said, there is no more important issue for us here this week than climate change. It's so clear. The Foreign Secretary, the UK Foreign Secretary, has said publicly on multiple occasions that climate and nature will be at the very core of every single thing that the Foreign, Common and Development Office will do. He's recently announced two new special representatives on climate nature as well, which will bring real expertise and energy to our engagement around the world on these issues. As others have said today, we cannot address the urgency of the climate and the nature crisis without coordinated global action. In particular, that needs to include an ambitious new climate finance goal at COP29 that includes a full range of sources, broadens the contributor base, and increases the predictability, access, and quality of climate finance. The UK has long been proud to be a champion of the small island developing states. We are committed to continuing to partner with SIDS to reform the international finance system and to grow resilient, prosperous futures for those on the front line of climate change. I know that we have collaborated with many of you and your countries over the last few years on mutual priorities, including improving access to finance and quality of aid, as well as funding for disaster-resilient infrastructure and sustainable blue economies. The UK continues to work hard to build consensus at the DAC on consideration of vulnerability in financial decision-making. We are using positions on the board of the World Bank and the GCF to try and improve systems and processes, and we are championing innovative finance instruments such as climate-resilient debt clauses and a new levy on global shipping, with the funds going towards tackling climate change. Perhaps closer to home here at CHOGM, the UK is very proud to co-chair the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance, and we've been piloting initiatives in 6 Commonwealth countries: Bangladesh, Fiji, Jamaica, Mauritius, Rwanda and Uganda, and seeking to transform the way that finance is accessed by climate-vulnerable countries. Last year at COP28, the UK announced funding for a new Centre for Access to Climate Finance, hosted by the NDC Partnership. That centre is providing thought leadership and policy analysis and disseminating lessons learned from the task force country trials and broader efforts on access, encouraging further steps on global reform of the climate finance system. As others have outlined here this morning as well, the Commonwealth has a really important role to play in supporting its members to access and to use the available for climate finance. The Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub has achieved remarkable impact since its inception in 2018, and the UK has been very proud to have been part of that journey. We especially welcome the new commitments today, tentative for the second, and we look forward to continuing to work with members and with the Secretariat to enhance the strategic impact and sustainability of this remarkable programme. We welcome recent work in particular to secure mutual observer status between the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance and the Commonwealth Climate Finance Action Hub. We believe the organisations have much to learn together, and I know much of that has happened on the ground in Mauritius as host, and we're deeply grateful for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. So we now have Dr. Zipporah Berman, Chair of the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, honourable ministers and distinguished guests, it's an honour to join you here in Samoa for CHOGM and participate in this critical climate finance discussion. Over the past 20 years, extreme weather events globally, hurricanes, floods, heat waves, have cost an estimated $2.8 trillion, according to a recent study by the World Economic Forum. That breaks down to about $16.3 million an hour. We know that rising temperatures have increased the likelihood and intensity of extreme weather events, and individual extreme weather events can now be directly attributed to the effects of climate change. We also know that climate change is happening because of the carbon trapped in our atmosphere, and 86% of the carbon trapped in our atmosphere comes from three things: oil, gas, and coal. Despite this knowledge, fossil fuel production is increasing globally. In fact, the United Nations Environment Programme Production Gap Report shows clearly that we're on track to produce 110% more oil, gas, and coal between now and 2030 than we can ever burn if we want to stay below 1.5 degrees. In fact, the report shows that the world will need to decrease fossil fuel production by at least 6% per year between 2020 and 2030 if we're to meet our climate goals. The research that we will release tomorrow in our report, Uncommon Wealth, shows that despite representing 6% of the Commonwealth's population, Australia, Canada, and the UK are responsible for over 60% of the emissions generated from extraction across Commonwealth countries since 1990. These three countries are the primary drivers also of new oil and gas projects within the Commonwealth. Despite dominating fossil fuel extraction, these wealthy nations rely far less on fossil fuel rents for their economies compared to lower income Commonwealth nations, which of course we heard this morning face greater economic stability and debt burdens. Commonwealth countries' business as usual fossil fuel extraction plans right now will lead to 84 billion tonnes of CO2 emissions by 2050, far exceeding the targets for a net zero scenario. We know today that Australia's fossil fuel exports are second only to Russia, with significant plans just recently announced for 3 new coal mine approvals and the largest pipeline of coal export projects in the world awaiting approval. These plans for fossil fuel expansion are inconsistent with our shared goal of staying below 1.5 degrees and threaten the very existence of many Commonwealth countries. The science is very clear. If we're to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, no new projects fit, and we must ensure absolute production and emissions decline now. The incoming Commonwealth Secretary-General must champion the needs of the Commonwealth's majority, low and middle-income countries, which face insurmountable debt exacerbated by colonial legacies and climate-induced losses. Without adequate financial support and debt alleviation from wealthier member states, these nations will struggle to fund climate resilience and just energy transition. The need for greater international cooperation on fossil fuel reduction and financial aid is even more pressing. As financial strain mounts on developing nations already grappling with the impact of climate change, our research suggests a troubling trend. The majority of Commonwealth countries are minimally responsible for global emissions. Fossil fuel producers in the Commonwealth's global south are growing more dependent on fossil fuel revenues as indebtedness grows to sustain their economies. And in contrast, the wealthier nations, Australia, Canada, and the UK, continue to profit from fossil fuel production expansion without facing similar financial pressures. These countries must take the lead in financing the global energy transition by increasing grants, providing non-debt created financial flows, and supporting debt alleviation initiatives for climate-vulnerable nations. The Commonwealth has a unique role in shaping a resilient and sustainable future for its members, and as we gather here today for CHOGM 2024 in Samoa, the call for a just and equitable transition away from fossil fuels has never been more urgent. The transition must prioritize not just the phase-out of fossil fuels, but also the financial support and debt alleviation necessary for countries most affected by the climate crisis. I know our time is short, so I won't go into detail, but I encourage you to read the report Leveraging Debt for Renewable Swaps for a Just Energy Transition, a deep analysis on the case of Caribbean small island developing states that was just released by Priya Mohan and Yawahala Rambaran. It emphasizes the necessity of innovative financial solutions, and that's what we're working on. 8 Commonwealth nations have already endorsed a companion agreement to the Paris Agreement, a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. A further 6 from outside the Commonwealth make 14 nations that are now working to develop a fossil fuel treaty that supports fair financing, ensures debt relief, and develops trade and tax agreements that will help to create a plan for fossil fuel phase-out that leaves no one behind. Finally, in regards to the specific actions that can be taken to strengthen action under the Paris Agreement, it's critical that countries include plans for a managed wind-down of production consistent with Paris goals within their NDCs. And under the NCQ, we need trillions, not billions, flowing to developing countries. As per the latest analysis, Global North countries have the means to mobilize well over $5 trillion a year for climate action at home and for the NCQG. As we've heard this morning from our distinguished leaders, the NCQG must set a public finance provision quantum that is significant. We need a high-quality NCG stating clear principles of equity and common differentiation, and the NCQG must ensure accessibility and responsiveness to marginalized communities and groups, and non-exacerbation of debt challenges. I'll end with a small story. This year I was invited to Hawaii, the first state to join the Fossil Fuel Treaty, to tour the rebuilding efforts in Lahaina. While I was there, listening to mothers telling me of racing down their street with their children ahead of the fires, jumping into the ocean while they watched their town burn. 80 of their neighbors on that one street died that day. While I was there in Lahaina, the Mauna Observatory that I could see from across the water that measures global concentration released that the atmospheric concentrations of carbon were growing faster than any other point in history. We cannot afford to keep dancing around this issue of fossil fuel growth and production. What we build today will be what we use tomorrow. I know that some of my comments here on specific country plans and emissions may make some people uncomfortable, but I offer that our priority at this difficult moment in history, when millions have died this year alone from air pollution due to fossil fuels and lethal heat, and millions more have been displaced, our priority must not be to make each other comfortable, but to protect life and living systems and the public good. Our children and our grandchildren are looking to us to build a cleaner and safer world. Thank you for your leadership in doing that.
Thank you, Dr. Berman. Our last speaker is Mr. Giovanni Henry. He's one of our own, Commonwealth Secretariat's own. He was a young professional with us, and he has proved himself and continues to be a great youth leader. He's currently UN Secretary General's Youth Climate Advisor. Giovanni, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Ruth. Excellencies, friends of the Commonwealth, and particularly to the Right Honourable Patricia Scotland, KC, Secretary General, who certainly has been a champion for young people and continues to be a true champion for the plights of young people. Certainly it's always good to be back in the Commonwealth space. I consider it coming back home. And of course, as Dr. Ruth would have mentioned, being a product of the Young Professionals Program. But also seeing how the Commonwealth continues to demonstrate bold leadership in empowering young people to be agents of change and also being at the heart of the development agenda. And not just in words, but in the actions across its 56 member countries. Now, it is this bold leadership we need now more than ever, particularly ahead of this finance COP. And we've heard this several times, that this has to be a finance COP which delivers. And from the onset, I think we can all agree that the finance needed is there. It is there. It is there to ensure that my Caribbean islands, or here in the Pacific, or other developing countries have the capacity to stay alive and thrive. The good news is that we have the tools, the resources, and the programs, like the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which have demonstrated the capacity to not only support countries to unlock this finance, but also build that human and institutional capacity, creating an environment for sustained long-term impact in countries. What we are missing is a greater level, just a little greater level of political will to match the delivery of the finance with the rate of urgency of the climate crisis. Now, the UN Secretary General always encourages us to be a bit bold and unconventional, since clearly business as usual has put us perhaps on the wrong trajectory. So let us be frank. What I mean by let's be frank at this point in time, we cannot allow ongoing geopolitical issues to dilute the focus on the fundamental threat to humanity, and that is the climate crisis. A peaceful planet must go in tandem with a climate resilient one. And I think a simple message which I've reiterated over this week for leaders is that for this COP, let us put people above politics in delivering a climate finance goal which is aligned with 1.5. That should be the baseline in which we start our discussions. You know, Bob Marley, of course coming from the Caribbean, in his song One Love, or what I tend to call a generational anthem, he said, let's get together and feel all right. And I don't think at the time he was referring to the climate crisis, but clearly we've seen now that the climate crisis unites us and is calling for unified action, with urgent delivery of finance being pivotal to this. Whether it is the hurricanes ravaging my homes from the Caribbean islands, or the droughts in parts of Africa, or flooding in parts of Asia, or the rising sea levels here in the Pacific, these phenomena are calling for an unprecedented level of multilateral cooperation. In this dynamic environment, with increasing linkages between climate and other areas, it is vital that the Commonwealth continues to maintain a forward-looking approach. And I certainly have to commend the efforts of the Commonwealth in taking steps forward, whether it is on climate and health, or artificial intelligence, or embracing other emerging technologies, and how these are being integrated in what I like to call the solution-oriented era for climate. And certainly having young people at the heart of these, and continuing to maintain having young people at the heart of this agenda as catalysts, is key. And I think that is sort of my rallying call for further support to the Commonwealth, that they can definitely take this work up a level. Now, in closing, our generation, we remain hopeful. I think I can put on my youth hat right now. We remain hopeful that through our collective will, we can successfully navigate through these turbulent waters and steer us on a pathway in line with 1.5. We have the scientific data clearly indicating what needs to be done. We have the mechanisms and programs to actually get it done. So at COP, let's get it done for our people and planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanni. As our young leader, he continues to make us proud every time. But I want to thank everybody. We don't have time. We've already overrun, and the team is under pressure. So I would request all of us to leave the room and any conversations we can have in the corridor. But I'd like to thank all the panelists and Unni and the whole climate change team for putting together an excellent program for us. Thank you, SG.